Business process convergence is really where you eliminate a process or you're merging intercompany processes into one. I have a large supplier, actually several large suppliers, which I'm having discussions with about eliminating the purchase order. Why don't you just invoice me for services rendered? We'll do a post audit on to make sure that the purchase order that you're invoicing me against that you created actually is in fact valid. The reason we're doing that is because what we think is that it slows down the process when you have too many transactions in it, so you want to eliminate the transactions. When you eliminate the transactions, you eliminate the people, you eliminate that cost, but at the same time, you're also creating a new way of doing business, new way of looking at how you do business, and we can do that with our strategic suppliers that we have a long-term relationship with. When I got to Korea and living in Seoul and working for the CEO of LG Electronics was, usually you're talking about contracts and acquisition process around contracts. I asked my team to give me a report on all the contracts that LG had in place, and they came back with 3. There were no contracts. Most of the $50 billion that LG was spending in Asia with Chinese and Japanese and Korean and Taiwanese companies had no contracts. They were all based on very strong collaborative historical relationships that was really very different than anything I exposed to before. And of course, the contracts were with U.S. companies. As you might imagine, because the U.S. companies just demanded that they have contracts for their services, even though they were probably less favorable than others than a non-formal or informal contract. And our customers are now, and many organizations are talking about these control towers and multi-tier control towers, where they actually look at the critical parts of the business and the outsourced and non-critical. A good example of that is, if you look at your phone. In your phone, there's probably 2 or 3 devices that actually drive the performance of that phone. One is obviously, network drivers and things that are processors that are very key, very expensive components of the phone. The rest of it, really the general components, printed circuit board, fabricated plastics, mechanical assemblies and things like that, cables and connectors, pretty low technology. That's pretty much all outsourced and is provided by other companies in the supply chain around the world. So really it's kind of this 80-20 rule now, where most companies are actually operating their critical components and then outsourcing the rest. And they do this by actually having control towers that actually look multiple tiers down their supply chain to not only understand what's happening at one layer, but happening 2 or 3 layers down that. Integration. The whole idea of actually looking at our acquisition process as one where we don't have to do everything, but we have to be kind of a control tower for everything that's done. And what that means is we have to kind of sit back and kind of look at it from what views do we need to have, what kinds of technologies do we need to give us those views, and then what kind of skills do we have in place to actually do that work. I'm working heavily with my team on developing logistics and tracking capabilities around transportation, looking at how fast I can go, how much risk I can take, by how fast I go, and looking at the trade-offs between velocity and risk and cost. And really developing a whole concept around the command and control over what's happening in my business rather than distributing that out. If you look back 10 years ago, it was all about delegation and pushing decision-making to the lowest point in the organization. I think we're seeing some repercussions from that. I think it's more important that we have very effective command and control over how it's done, the decisions that are made around it, by highlighting any decision over a certain level actually has to move to the command center and actually to be for that decision to be made. So I think we're moving away from category management. Again, sometimes I fight against some of our own textbooks on the subject of purchasing, but I think we're moving towards multi-tier supplier management away from just category management. For example, IT might be called a category, PCs might be called a commodity, but multi-tier supplier management would be a much more interested, mainly not so much in the software I might buy in a certain commodity, but actually what software I buy, how I buy that software. Should it be an app-based mobile software? Should it be an enterprise software? I mean, decision-making at a control tower is asking the question why, asking the question how, asking the question when, and asking the question how much, and doing the questions at the control tower level rather than at a category level in order to make sure that the most important decisions are made properly. Around how the world is collaborating differently, we'll understand the fact that the zero sum is like gambling or a sporting event. Zero sum is win-lose. Gambling is win-lose. Non-zero is something that was articulated by an author by the name of Robert Wright in a book called Non-Zero. It was written in 2001. And what he really argues is how mankind, if you go back all the way to the Eskimos, and he went way back, has actually been on a steady progressional climb toward a non-zero approach. I think what we're seeing is something we need to really think about from a procurement standpoint. And what Robert Wright talked about was an Eskimo, the Eskimos actually were forced into non-zero levels of collaboration when one village would get a whale, 1 year, and another village would have no whale. And, when the villagers started to die, they could either attack the other village and try to take their whale, or they could make a deal. They could say, look, we get a whale 1 year, we'll split the whale with you. You get a whale 1 year, you split the whale with us. And it all became part of the division of labor where, once they figured out how to build boats and throw spears and kill whales, now they were moving on towards where they could actually collaborate and share the harvest of the whale meat. And then there's examples all the way up through time, all the way up through, there's wars and disruptions and terrorism events and things that happen along the way. But if you look at it in a progressive line, kind of you correlate all the events of what's happened, really, it basically goes back to the fact that, the bees are right. You have to work together in order to build a hive and make honey. So, it's the whole idea of how do you actually look at this. And then, of course, in my experience, I talked about Korea, where we had no contracts. And I balanced that against a really illegal environment in the United States where everything's a contract. I think we have contracts for contracts. We have so many ways of having to go about doing our business that I think it's causing some real dissonance in me as far as how we should do our jobs better. When outside the United States we can do it one way, inside the United States we can do it another. Really driving trust, transparency, and reliability. And this whole idea of trust and transparency is enormous. The openness right now of communications that occur, not just from email traffic, from texting between suppliers and companies, is just taken on enormous proportions. There are chat rooms we have with suppliers, and we just basically that's gotten everybody a lot more honest. The more transparent it is, the more open it is. Actually, the more honest it is. We're finding that we're having less problems as things become more open. The optimism and dancing, I think we're about to explode in a whole new dimension, a whole new vector. I think the way we thought about buyer-seller relationships and offer acceptance and invoice, I think these things are just all up for grabs. I don't think you need to even place purchase orders, for example. That's a heresy for you. And I think that we can really expand our thinking in new directions by leveraging some of the low-cost IT solutions which are emerging in the cloud. And I think all of this is going to make us better. I think economies are going to benefit, and I think people that are in supply chain and acquisition are going to make a big difference in it.